Thank you, Osha's initiative, idea to do this. Thank you, Osha. Thank you, of course, David Goren, for agreeing to do this. We're all keenly waiting to hear what we're going to learn from you tonight. And thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you, David Sultan, for speaking to David Goren and organizing it, to Shuli for preparing a beautiful flyer as usual.
Okay, and I'm just going to make a short remark that is the tip of an iceberg. People who have been getting the vaccination, I haven't gotten it yet, not because I was offered and refused, because they're not letting me in yet. But I plan to get it as soon as I can, Be'ezrat Hashem. And I've seen a lot of people, you know, taking pictures, making videos of themselves getting the vaccination, and making different barachot over it. I've seen several tefillot that have been written to say when getting the vaccination and barachot. The tefillot are very beautiful. They express the very firm belief of the combination between human abilities, human wisdom, science, technology, medicine, and the hashgacha, Hashem seeing over this and giving us the hopeful solution to this very great challenge, maybe one of the greatest, if not the greatest, that the world has experienced as a world, not only ourselves as individuals in our lives. And it's very exciting. It's very exciting to see that, yes, we have some very serious challenges, and yes, we can also handle our challenges, Be'ezrat Hashem. And I'd like to just discuss shortly, the tefillot are beautiful, and there's no problem. Anyone here who wants to create tefillot, please feel free and share them with us. The question of making a bracha, is it right to make a bracha when you get the vaccine or at any other time? So I will say very shortly, and maybe on Shabbat I will expand a little bit, that to say Shechianu is a halachic controversy. Do you say Shechianu only for very specific things? Or can one say Shechianu for something that they're very happy and excited about? If you go by the second opinion, that Shechianu is a more open, that is only designated for things that the rabbis defined, but that we can make the bracha when we are very happy about different occurrences that are not daily, then we can make a Shechianu over this. But maybe it's better to say a different bracha called Hatov V'Amitiv. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Hatov V'Amitiv, because that blessing is said, that bracha is said for something that's good for me and good for others, that we share. When I get vaccinated, I'm not only protecting myself, I'm also protecting other people at the same time. And it's an expression of how this is good for all of us. And there are rabbis who have been saying this bracha, Hatov V'Amitiv, when they get the vaccination. There is another interesting bracha in halacha, when you see someone who is a very wise person, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Shenatan mechochmato lebasar v'dam, that Hashem has given from his wisdom to human beings. And some people have said that bracha because, wow, human beings have put together this vaccination. Impressive. I don't think that's the right bracha to say here, because it's not the person you're seeing, it's the result of his wisdom that you're experiencing. But I would say Hatov V'Amitiv, and hopefully when my turn comes, I hope to say Hatov V'Amitiv, or maybe say it now, maybe because we're all in this blessing together. And maybe I will expand on this issue either on Shabbat or on another opportunity. Thank you again, everyone, for putting this together. David Goren, I would say the floor is yours, but during coronavirus, I would say the Zoom and the screen are yours.
Okay. Hi. Thank you, Rav Tzvi. Thank you, Oshra, David Sultan, Shuli, and thanks, everybody. What I thought I would do is talk a little bit about COVID, what we know, try to sort through some facts from fiction, talk a little bit about what we don't know, because there's a lot of conjecture in that space. From there, talk a little bit about the vaccine landscape, how COVID compares to some other things we've faced. And in the spirit of what you just said, there really are some truly miraculous things to be thankful for here. Talk about, again, what we know in vaccines, what we don't know. And then talk a little bit about how research is done, the different phases, and then leave time for questions. If there are questions along the way, I'm happy to respond and answer as well. So please feel free to stop me along the way. I also am CEO and chairman of an Israeli biotech company called Vaxil, where we are also developing, we've discovered and we are developing a vaccine for COVID, as well as cancer therapies and some other infectious diseases. So when I talk a little bit about the different technologies that are out there, I'll also mention Vaxil. So starting off, COVID, the numbers are a little bit hard to decipher. The easiest reference point is the US. The data there seem to be the most public, the most referenced. There are a lot of anomalies in the data, so everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. And we have to remember that this all started actually just a little bit more than a year ago. As far as we know, maybe a year and a month, if we go by some of the things maybe that we don't know. But a lot of the things that we hear, for instance, are how does this compare to regular flu? And in terms of the number of cases in the US, COVID actually has fewer cases than what we would normally see in a flu season. So if we normally would see 40, 50 million cases of flu in the US, for example, and these numbers are estimates because they're based off of projection models that the CDC does every year. We're seeing roughly now about 20 million cases of COVID. We would see anywhere 500,000-600,000 hospitalizations. We see 125,000 hospitalizations in the US now as we speak. So the total number of hospitalizations far exceeds what we would see for regular flu, if that's the comparator. Now, there's been a lot of talk about how there are incentives for hospitals to report COVID and so on. But even if you take that into account, the hospitalizations are still far more than what we would see in a normal flu season. Ironically, what we've seen in Southern Hemisphere countries before, and now we're seeing in the winter seasons, there are far fewer regular flu cases because of the social distancing, the hand washing, the mask wearing. It's definitely having an impact and significantly reducing the incidence of flu. But the big difference between what we normally see in a flu season and COVID is actually in the number of deaths. And so where you'd normally see somewhere between 25 and 50,000 deaths in a flu season in the US, and with COVID, we see over 300,000. So we're getting close to 350,000. Those numbers are accelerating pretty quickly. So COVID is very different. You see, especially in the death count, unfortunately, almost 7 times as many deaths as would be seen in a flu season. And that's keeping in mind that a flu season is generally confined to about 5 months or so, whereas COVID is going on for a year at least. If we look at what's happening in the US now as well, we see that the US hospitals are being overwhelmed. The ICUs are flooded. 20% of hospitals, almost 20% of the US hospitals have 95% or more of their ICU beds occupied. So we see similar things happening in Israel, but I would say our situation is better. We see that the ICU beds are not being flooded the same way, although we are certainly trying to control the situation, and these lockdowns, or whatever we call them, they do seem to have some effect. It looks like they're having a decreasing effect as time goes on, but they are having an effect. And the main goal of these lockdowns is to try to keep the hospitals functioning. A lot of the hospitals have stopped doing everything else, or at least during these peaks, they stopped doing everything else. And they convert units over so that they can handle the COVID cases. There's a lot we do not know about COVID. We know that the virus is sort of like a regular cold, winter cold kind of that we see in the sense of this spike protein, the general structure. There are a lot of theories, but we have to remember that we only met this virus a year ago. So we really don't know for sure how it started. There are theories. The most common theories are that it jumped from animals, started in China. There are some other reliable or interesting theories about what happened, but that seems to be the most prevalent one. And we may never know exactly what happened. There are also plenty of other theories. Some of them people would call conspiracy theories. But the most likely theory, and one that's been out there long before COVID, is that viruses that start with animals jump to humans. And we've seen that happen multiple times, and I'll talk a little bit about some other examples. But what we also don't know is why some people are more affected than others. So we know that pre-existing conditions does seem to increase the bad outcomes, and certain ones more than others, cardiovascular specifically. And part of that is somewhat understood, or at least hypothesized, in the sense of what there's a certain part of the virus that works in a way on the heart. And so there's reason to believe that there are effects on the cardiovascular system, so diabetes and other cardiovascular or cardiovascular related diseases. Another thing we don't know is what the long-term effects of COVID are. There's started to be some reports about different effects that are more distant, from psychological to cardiovascular, as I mentioned, but we really don't know what it's going to look like in the long term. There's a side effect of COVID, of course, that because a lot of resources are diverted to COVID, a lot of other things are not being treated. So cancer prevention and a lot of other preventative activities that would normally be happening are not happening. So we will see waves of that coming up later. We also cannot be 100% sure that a COVID case is reported as a COVID case. And there are different things in different places. So different countries operate differently. The tests have different thresholds in different places. There hasn't been one global standard set. So we can pretty much assume, that a lot of what's being called COVID is COVID, but there are reasons sometimes why a death can be reported as a COVID-related death when it might not be. I hear from a lot of people, well, these people have pre-existing conditions, they would have died anyway. I don't like that story, quite frankly. I don't, it doesn't appeal to me on many levels, but also scientifically from the analyses that have been done, it is also does not appear to be true. So the death rates appear to be significantly greater where it's been studied, including in Israel, and as a result of COVID. So what we see, though, is, for example, there's a phenomenon of infections happening from people who go into the hospital. They're called nosocomial infections. So somebody who catches an infection in a hospital, those bacteria generally tend to be stronger, more virulent. They tend to kill more than ones that are communicated through or transmitted in the community. We see a big drop in those because we don't see people going in the hospital for things as much as we would normally that are not related to COVID. So there are certain things that are dropping, but we certainly are seeing a significant number of these COVID deaths. So that's kind of a lot of what we don't know. Moving from there to vaccines. So I think it's helpful to put this in context. So again, this all started, let's say November or December a year ago. The first human trial for a vaccine began 67 days after the genomic sequencing was published, which was done in about 2 weeks, depending on who you believe, but 2, 4, 6 weeks, something like that. So 67 days to the start of the first human trial. If we think about some other viruses we've seen in the last few years, so Zika, the first clinical trial started about 1.5 years after it was identified. SARS, which we've heard a lot more about because it's also a COVID-like virus, took almost 1 year for the first trial to start. Ebola was about half a year. And these are not necessarily old. So SARS started in 2003, Ebola 2014, Zika 2015. So some of these are very recent, but the resources and efforts that have been put toward getting a vaccine for COVID have been appropriate to the bracha, Rabbi, that you mentioned at the beginning. This is something that really hasn't been done before. And so I think we all need to appreciate and be grateful for the efforts here. And that's not even taking into account the fact that the results of some of these trials are actually also quite impressive and phenomenal. The WHO declared COVID as a pandemic, and within 272 days, so less than a year, the first commercial vaccination took place, so about 2/3 of a year. Also, shocking result and something we in Israel actually can be very grateful for, since we're at the forefront of that vaccination wave. Something else to keep in mind, if we look back at flu vaccines as an example, because we all are more or less exposed to the topics and the advertising around flu vaccines. Flu vaccines are not very effective. If you look at the numbers statistically and compare them to what we've seen with the COVID vaccines, where we saw 94 and 95% efficacy in clinical trials that were done on between 30 and 44,000 people. Flu vaccines range between 19 and 60% effective. So in 2014, it was a bad year for the flu vaccines. They were 14% effective, and they average over about the last 15 years or so, they averaged 39% effective. So again, I'm a big fan of flu vaccines because whatever it does, it improves health. And I've been taking my flu vaccine for many, many years. I travel a lot and am maybe at a higher risk and more exposed. But I do believe that that flu has a lot of dangerous effects and impacts, and the vaccine is a good thing. But when you compare the two vaccines that we know most about, the Pfizer and Moderna ones, they were both in the range of 94, 95% efficacy. A new vaccine was approved today in the UK from AstraZeneca. We'll talk about the different technologies. But what we should be aware of is that clinical trials are great, and we learn a lot from them, but we don't always see the same results in the real world. So one example would be for that the clinical trials done on both Pfizer, Moderna, and also actually on AstraZeneca were done with 2 shots. And in the real world, people don't always go back for the second shot. So that's something we may very well see. We look at efficacy after the first shot. We look at it after the second shot. The study only looked at it after the second shot. I'm sure that we'll learn over time that one shot provides maybe 40%. I've seen some numbers, 50% efficacy. But really, for these technologies, the ones that we have so far, people need to get the second shot in order to get that high level of efficacy. It could very well be that in the clinical trials, there were some natural biases that were not covered and not accounted for. Maybe the people who were doing those trials were more inclined to wear masks and social distance and wash hands. And those were not things that were measured in the trials. So we may very well see that in the real world, efficacy is a little bit lower. But even if it's a little bit lower, it's still going to be good and good enough to get the effect that we want, which is to try to establish a normal way of living. Some other things we don't know how long the immunity lasts. So when somebody gets both shots, the metric was 2 weeks after the second shot, we were exposed to the data of how the immune system responded. So 2 weeks after the second shot. But we don't know if it lasts a month, 6 months, a year. People have hypothesized minimum 6 months. We don't know if it will behave like flu and require annual shots or boosters. There's a lot that we still don't know. We don't know what type of memory cell is created, memory cell effect is created from these vaccines. Excuse me. And we certainly don't know what what effect comes from the ones that are not yet approved. By the way, I mentioned Pfizer and Moderna as being the two approved, and today AstraZeneca just in the UK. There are several other vaccines that have been approved, but China, Russia, and so on, with not a lot of transparency. So we really don't know a lot about them. We're not really seeing them in Israel, so I don't think we have to go into any details on that. Another point I want to make about about how we take a look at vaccines and decisions that everybody will make, and so you mentioned that you'll go get it as soon as you can, and I will as well. But we have faced lots of crazy things in our lives. We've all seen behaviors change. We've all seen things that we get used to and eventually are more willing to do. I remember as a kid growing up, maybe some other people on the call will remember that we didn't have seatbelts in our cars when I was a kid. And that was just very normal. And I do remember my mom complaining about how the seatbelt wrinkled her dress when she would wear it. And we now accept that wearing seatbelts is normal. We may be in a situation now due to COVID, but there may be others that will come later where we will get used to the fact that we need to be wearing masks. And it may not be all the time. It may be sometimes. There may be peaks. There may be times of need greater than others. But we all have risky behaviors that we accept. And so everybody's going to have to make those decisions about what their risk tolerance is. People dye their hair and use chemicals that cause all sorts of problems. People whiten their teeth. There are a lot of behaviors we have in the world. People inject highly toxic chemicals into their faces to get rid of wrinkles. So there are lots of things in the world that cause risk. And so it would say everybody should look at the risk, not just of what if I take the vaccine, but also compare it, what if I don't, and make sure that we're making the best decisions we can for ourselves, for the people that are immediately around us, but also as a society. I think it's important for us to consider our behavior and the impact it has on everybody. At the moment, there are 83 clinical trials for vaccines in the world. Many of them are in different stages. I'll talk about that in a sec. There are 8 approved, let's call them approved vaccines. As I mentioned, most of those are Russia, China, and not being used broadly. But I will say also that Pfizer, Moderna, their approvals are EUAs, they're emergency approvals. So they're not permanent approvals, and they can be withdrawn and they can be extended, but they are given for the emergency situation that we're in. David, I noticed there's some questions coming across. I can't get to them fast enough, but should I pause for a second to answer some questions?
No, I think you should continue, David, and we'll review the questions during the Q&A moment.
Okay, great. So as I said, there are 83 vaccines that are in clinical trials. I want to talk a little bit about what happens in clinical trials for those who don't know. So first of all, before one can get to a clinical trial, there are a variety of experiments that are done in the lab, as well as with animals. Generally, vaccines, before they can be tested in humans, are usually tested in a non-human primate. And it's generally for safety. It's basically to see that no harm is caused, but we're also always going to be looking for signals of efficacy or signals that the immune system responds. It turns out with COVID that we're interested in 2 types of immune responses. Some of the vaccines have done a great job of generating one, but not the other. It looks like Pfizer and Moderna have done both. They've generated the cellular and the humoral response, the T cell and the B cell response. So in that sense, they appear to be good vaccines. Quite surprising for the first 2, and the first one especially, Pfizer, to come out and already be that good. But as I mentioned, preclinical is the first stage where we do a lot of work to make sure primarily that something is safe before we administer it to humans, but we also want to make sure that it works. And there are about 50, 50 preclinical programs at the moment, including Vaxil, where I work, but also many of the large pharma companies have preclinical programs, and a lot of the startups do as well. Phase 1 is the first stage of a clinical trial where we're looking really only at safety. Generally, it's a small study and given to healthy humans. The one thing that separates a vaccine from a drug is a vaccine is generally given to healthy people, right? A vaccine is something you give to prevent disease, whereas a drug is given to someone who has a disease, and we either are trying to slow it down or potentially cure it. So in a phase 1 study for a drug or a vaccine, we're just generally looking to make sure that it's safe and that we don't see any significant side effects. With Pfizer and Moderna, the side effects were mild, passing within 3-4 days or so. The biggest side effect that was seen was injection site soreness and other things related to the injection site, which is very common, obviously, for any injection. With the Pfizer and Moderna ones, we also saw mild side effects that are COVID-like or flu-like symptoms for usually a day, maybe 2 days, but again, relatively mild and passing. Phase 2 is an expansion of phase 1. So we start expanding the number of people we try. And in both cases, phase 1 and phase 2, we're looking for indications in vaccines. We're looking for indications of an immune response. So we're not really testing efficacy, but we're looking for the indication that there is an immune response to the vaccine. And then in phase 3, which is the large scale study, in the case of Pfizer, about 44,000, Moderna had about 31,000 people in their phase 3 study. Those are large scale studies, and they're focused on efficacy. There you want to see a separation where you see that the people who got, and they're usually placebo controlled studies these days. So you want to see that the people who got the real vaccine get fewer cases of COVID than the people who got a placebo or not the vaccine. It's a very difficult study to do in this type of vaccine situation. In a disease, it's much easier because you give either placebo or you give standard of care, and you look to see that the drug does something better than what patients would normally get. In a vaccine case, you actually have to wait for enough people to be exposed to the disease so that you can show that the people who got the vaccine didn't get it in larger numbers than the ones who did not get the vaccine. In the case of the Pfizer study, I believe they had a point with the FDA. They agreed that when they saw 192 patients get COVID anywhere out of the 44,000, that would be an acceptable point at which they could start to look for that separation between the people who got the vaccine or did not get the vaccine. And in the case of Pfizer, they saw the separation, and I think they had about 10 or 12 people who got COVID, who were 192 people who got COVID in the study and were able to get to that stopping point faster than what was expected, and that's part of what got them onto the market much faster, even than Moderna, and partly because they started sooner, partly because Moderna had some other problems in their study, and partly because their study was larger by almost 50%. So those are the different phases. Generally, after a phase 3 study, there would be a long period of review by the FDA, followed by an approval if safety and efficacy have been proven. The FDA set a bar for approval of 50%. So everybody was, of course, thrilled to see the 94% efficacy. And those are the different stages of clinical trials, and that's where we are with those two. In terms of the vaccines and the different types, I'll just run through. There are fundamentally, there are 4 different types of vaccines out there. So I'll just run through those quickly, what the 4 look like, and maybe a couple of other factors that you may hear being discussed, and then and then just jump to questions quickly. So the first vaccine, the first type of vaccine is a genetic vaccine, and this is what Pfizer and Moderna have done. Sanofi is another company working on one. There's some other companies doing it, and they're using this mRNA technology. It's a very new approach. Moderna actually has been trying to get vaccines and drugs on the market for a very long time with this technology, but it took this kind of effort, and actually I think it may be that it took Pfizer to push this through and make this successful and get it on the market. And they use this genetic material, this messenger RNA, which is like genetic software that tells the cells to make a piece of this coronavirus spike protein. The spike protein is this picture you see behind me. This is the main element of the coronavirus that everybody's talking about. There are some risks in this approach. The virus has more than just that. And when we talk about mutations, we may see mutations actually in this particular space. We've already started to see in the last few days talk about this, this mutation in the UK and in South Africa, where so far the guess is that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines still work in that mutation. But the more the virus is around, and potentially even the more we vaccinate people, the more we'll see these mutations. That's kind of the nature of viruses and what they try to do. They just try to survive. And what you see in these mutations, including before this latest mutation, the most common mutation, which is already many times mutated from the original, the most common one was the one that was the most virulent, the one that spread the most efficiently. So it wasn't necessarily the one that was the most damaging or deadly, but it was the one that spread. And viruses are designed to survive. That's what they do. And this is their way of surviving. So by taking a piece, by making the cells make a piece of this corona spike protein, they basically teach the immune system how to respond. And then the immune system knows what to do when this corona spike protein comes in to the body. So that's the genetic approach. The second approach is viral vector, which is this AstraZeneca vaccine approved in the UK today. Most of them, if not all, I think are using this adenovirus. And basically, it's a virus that is engineered so that has no effect in the body. It doesn't actually cause disease, but it is engineered to carry this corona genetic material into the cells. And again, it then instructs the immune system to build up the defenses against the spike protein. So that's basically the second type. Many companies are developing this, including a couple of the Chinese, the Russian one, the AstraZeneca one I mentioned. Johnson & Johnson's working on one, which may come out or may get an approval in a month and a half or two. There are other viruses that have been used to carry in this viral vector space, measles, Ebola. So there's some other ones. By the way, the Machona Biologi, the Israeli other Israeli company or other Israeli vaccine uses that approach. The third vaccine type is a protein-based, or using part of the protein. In the case of Vaxil, where I work, this is where we fall. We use a very specific part of the protein. We use something called a signal peptide. We're actually the only company using this technology. We are in the middle of an experiment where we vaccinate animals and then expose them to COVID, and then look to see that they will, the ones that have been vaccinated do better than the ones that have not been vaccinated. So I mentioned preclinical studies. That's an example of one of the most important in the final preclinical study, where something you can do today ethically in animals. Obviously, there are many ethical questions about whether it can be done in humans. There have been discussions around the world. Let's say in places like Israel and the US, it would not be done. So you would not vaccinate people, then expose them to COVID and see what happens. But it is done in animals, and that's that non-human primate example I gave earlier. And we're doing it in different environment. There are other companies that are working on different protein subunits, and they most of them take little pieces of the virus. And again, they try to get the immune system to recognize it and be able to work against it. A lot of these other technologies are manufactured in very challenging ways. And that's going to be one of the big issues we're going to look at. So we've heard about storage conditions, Pfizer -70, Moderna -20. Some of the other ones can be stored in a regular refrigerator. But what hasn't been discussed so much is the manufacturing technology. And some of these other vaccines use manufacturing technology that is not readily available. So it's okay if you're developing a drug for a disease that has a few million or a few 100 million people even, but when you're developing a vaccine for several billion, that would take up more than the existing manufacturing capacity. So that's another issue we'll see as time goes on with some of the other ones. Fortunately for Vaxil, for where I work, that's not an issue for us. Ours is the chemical manufacturing process, very simple, very inexpensive, very reliable, and potentially one of the reasons why hopefully we will see a Kachol Velavan vaccine out there that actually has great impact. And the fourth and last category is something called an inactivated virus. So it's where you take a weakened or a killed virus and that gets injected. That's one of the types that's used in flu, by the way. The virus is killed using a chemical or using heat, and then again, injected in order to generate knowledge for the immune system so that when the real one comes in, the immune system knows how to respond. Quick word about the mutations. We started to talk about that. So there is this UK, the N501Y. It appears that the South African one, it might be the same. It might be that the South African one started first. There's some, it's still relatively new, and I think there's still some misinformation going around about that. It does not seem to be a significant mutation in the sense that it does not seem to be capable of bypassing the vaccines that we know. But we should get confirmation of that in the next couple of weeks. COVID has been slower to mutate than flu, for example, according to the WHO. But I fully expect that we'll see mutations, and that's another big advantage of the Vaxil approach where I'm working, which is that we work on a part of the protein that is much less likely to mutate. It's conserved. So the goal is to get enough people vaccinated so that we get this herd immunity, this concept that everyone keeps talking about. Herd immunity is great because you get enough people vaccinated that the virus maybe goes to sleep, doesn't survive, or at least doesn't appear to survive. But we know with measles and polio, it can come back. So herd immunity is a good goal for an immediate goal, but it doesn't mean that everything goes away. We still have to remain vigilant. So that's kind of an overview of what I can share, what I know about COVID and the vaccines, the different types of vaccines and the status. And I think it's probably a good point in time to pause and handle questions, if that makes sense. So how do I do questions, David?
Can you read the chats? Or do you want me to read the questions with my beautiful French accent?
Definitely would rather you read them with your beautiful French accent, but if you prefer not to, I can read the chats.
As you wish, I'm fine.
So should I read each question first or just start answering? Can everybody see the chats?
Yes, I think everyone sees the chat, but maybe read them first. Okay.
So how does an individual know if they've developed a good level of immunity and how long it lasts? We have no idea. Good level of immunity, we sort of know through blood tests. We see we're looking more at the T cell response these days, hopefully to provide longer immunity. We have no idea how long it will last. There are cases, there was just one case reported of someone who got the Pfizer vaccine and then got sick within 2 weeks. There are cases, not a lot, but there are case reports of people who have been reinfected in a matter of months, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months. There are not a lot of case reports. Some people say that this is because it's not happening a lot. I would reserve judgment on that point. I would remind everybody that with COVID, we really don't know most people who have it, right? Most people are asymptomatic. And so if they are asymptomatic and get it again, they're asymptomatic, we really don't know that that happens. So I would say on the question of how long does immunity last, I would really reserve judgment and wait and see what happens. I really have no clue on that one. Sylvia asked who approved the vaccines. So if you mean the two for Pfizer and Moderna, they've been reviewed and approved by the US in this EUA, this emergency use authorization. Also the EU has approved, and UK approved AstraZeneca. Israel did not approve anything. Israel's using this procedure, it's called the Inactivated Virus, that allows the importation of drugs to Israel that have been approved by another authority. So it's a long story. I'm happy to talk to somebody about it. It's a very strange thing for Israel to do, but those are the two big global regulatory authorities that have approved those two. So to be fully effective, Leslie's saying the vaccine needs to be applied worldwide. How do we get them to poor countries? So it's a great question and a very important one. By the way, for those of you who have family in South Africa, you know that what's going on there is horrible and won't be solved easily. And it's not really because of the price of the vaccine, although that will certainly come up as one of the reasons, I'm sure, when it comes to politicians talking. But the distribution systems, the hospital, the care systems are a big issue in the poor countries. So the diseases that they face are ones that have been solved and are easily treated in Israel and countries like it. The Gates Foundation is working on it. There are CEPI, which is a European consortium, is working on it. There are many organizations that are working on distribution to poor countries. I can tell you AstraZeneca's vaccine is less expensive. Apparently, so far the numbers aren't really out officially, but appears to be much less expensive. Still probably beyond the reach of poor countries. For us at Vaxil, if we manage to get to the market, we will be able to price it in a way that it will be afforded by poor countries. So I don't have a great answer for that one. I think it's going to be a big issue. By the way, Leslie, you mentioned, you gave as an example African countries, but the Latin countries are also, South America are having massive, massive problems. Argentina is a mess. They've been in lockdown for like 300 days or something. So there are problems with this issue, and it's not going to be an easy one to solve, especially with the way the WHO has evolved during this year for a variety of political reasons. Threshold for herd immunity. So great question. I don't know that anyone can give a definitive answer. Fauci talks about 80%, and I would say that probably is the most reliable number we can look at. They did talk earlier about 60 and 70%, but I think as they saw the efficacy of the vaccines, they decided to aim higher. So I would be looking at 80% probably for herd immunity. 95% effective. No, it's effective for 95% of the population, Barbara. So according to that study, that's what that means. But again, there'll be a lot of things that will happen in the real world where that will change. So that's that question. 2 weeks after the second shot, can we still infect others? That's probably the biggest unknown. We have no idea if any of the vaccines either approved or being researched. We have no idea if they stop transmission. So again, don't say goodbye to this yet, because it's not going away. We're going to need to be wearing masks and social distancing for quite a while. It's going to take a long time till we understand this transmission question. And there may be variations to it. There may be certain types of transmission under certain circumstances. By the way, the transmission is not 100% for sure nailed, right? There's still evidence floating around about the size of the droplets in which this virus survives. varying from very, very small to larger. And that means that transmission is not definitively done only by close contact. It is still not ruled out that it happens with distant contact as well. So no good answer for that. I'm sorry, all these questions I don't have good answers for. I don't have any answers for. Okay, so Mark, super question on the what happens next time. So I think there are a few things there. This mRNA technology that Pfizer is now on the market with and Moderna is potentially a platform. So once we know that this works and how it works and all the different aspects of that, it's possible that they can design a similar one for another virus. Also Vaxil, so where I am, our platform will potentially work for other pandemics, other viruses, but not all. It's possible that the mRNA technology also won't work for all. It will depend a lot on the composition of the virus and how it spreads. And then each of the different technologies will have different ways that it would impact on additional pandemics. But I think we're going to face additional pandemics. This is going to happen where if you believe in this theory that these pandemics, the viruses are jumping from animals to humans, the more humans expand and encroach on animals and their land and territory, the more we're going to see this. So I think that's a very important question for health experts around the world to be dealing with and to be coming up with platform approaches that can be very easily turned on and adapted for what's specific. Agnes, what do I think about vaccination of, is that youth? Young people?
Yeah.
Yes. So the study, Pfizer's study was done 16 and up, Moderna 18 and up. So we don't have any evidence in kids. I don't believe any of the other studies that I'm aware of are looking at younger than 16. So we don't know. Transmission seems to be more common in kids and could just be because they travel around more. But the impact seems to be less. But in terms of vaccination, we really don't know a lot. Generally, we see the older people get, the less effective their immune systems are, and therefore vaccination efficacy goes down. We don't seem, at least in the clinical trials, we don't seem to be seeing that, thankfully. So that's a good thing, at least on the other end of that question, or the other end of that spectrum. Risk factors for pregnant and nursing moms. Again, great question. We don't know. Pregnant women are never in clinical trials. Actually, until not too long ago, there weren't very many women in clinical trials for all sorts of reasons. So I think the simple answer is we don't know. There are recommendations out that I've seen recommendations for pregnant women, if they don't have any other risk factors, to go ahead and get vaccinated. I think for nursing moms, it's a much bigger question in terms of how immunity is transferred through milk, and there's no research that I'm aware of that's looked at that, so I wouldn't want to comment on that. Sorry. Young women who want to be pregnant, there's no evidence of any problem there. So some people talk about, this is messenger RNA and it's changing our genetic makeup. That's not how it works, and so it's not likely that that's what's happening. But I don't see any evidence of young women who want to be pregnant being at any further risk than anybody else. It doesn't mean we won't find it later. Again, we have a very short amount of history with this, with the disease, and then even less with the vaccine. So risks beyond the known side effects would be extremely speculative on my part. So I really wouldn't want to go there. There are people who are talking about different kinds of risks, but I think we're not going to see them in months. These are the kinds of things you see in years and even longer than that, especially when you're talking about impact on the immune system. So there are various types of immune responses that one could anticipate seeing with any type of vaccine. And then there are, depending on which of the technologies, you can think about other aspects, but it's a much longer subject for a much deeper discussion. I think the second part of this question around, can I help weigh the risks of taking versus not taking the vaccine? I think that first of all, everybody has to do that for themselves, obviously. So I'm not going to try to take that away from anybody. I think that one must look at both. And if I look at what could happen to me if I get COVID, what could happen to me if I want to go see my 88-year-old mom, what risk am I putting her at if she's not been vaccinated or has been? I think these are the kinds of questions we have to ask ourselves. So it's risk to myself, risk to my immediate circle, family, et cetera, and then it's the community risk. We saw what happened with polio not so long ago when parents decided not to give their kids polio vaccines, and we got polio right back. And Israel ended up having to vaccinate for polio again. So, something we thought we had completely eradicated. So I think, first of all, it's everybody's own decision. And second of all, there are those three spheres of influence to consider: my own personal health, my immediate circle, and then beyond that. And I think those are the main consideration. How do authorities tell that a mutation has infected someone? So mutation screening is done in some countries more than in others. The US has actually fallen quite far behind on that. There are some other countries that are doing a much better job. But there are tests to see exactly what the strain is. And in the same way that the Chinese authorities initially identified the original from Wuhan, these same tests are used to look at the genetic makeup and look at the sequencing and see where the mutation is happening in the virus. Really optimistically, how will we be able to evaluate different countries as possible destinations? So if you look at any of the larger newspapers in the US, there's the New York Times, Washington Post, you can see what the infection rates are in countries. And then you can decide whether you believe those numbers or not, and whether there are countries that are reporting accurately or not. I suspect that there are some countries that just don't even have the capability to evaluate and therefore to report. So I think if you're vaccinated, you're probably okay to travel. And I would say that would be another consideration as you think about whether you want to be vaccinated or not. If you don't mind not traveling, that would be a consideration as well. Severe allergies, no, contraindicated at the moment. I would not do it. Our daughter actually has severe allergies. We've been debating how to handle that. She hasn't actually had a severe reaction in the same way that of the people that have had it in Alaska and the several people in the UK that have had these severe reactions. But I would say no, it's not a good idea. I think you have to talk to your doctor about that and understand what a severe allergy is, and make sure that you're talking about the same type of severe allergy that caused this anaphylactic reaction. But it's a conversation for you to have with your doctor. Who approved the Chinese and the Russian vaccines? The Chinese and the Russians. I'll leave it at that. First and second vaccine differences, and are there any contraindicated medications? So difference between first shot and second shot is personal. There isn't anything so much that I recall seeing in the data. I think people have had, I think, a bit more of an immune response after the second shot. So a bit more of the immune type of side effects, but nothing that's off the charts, nothing that has caused anybody any concern. And I do not know of any contraindicated medications. It's an interesting question. I don't think there's much known about that at the moment. But again, if you're taking medication, I would definitely check with your doctor and make sure that your doctor says it's okay. there's some discussion about the role of ACE in COVID, and it's worth a discussion with your doctor. I think it's an individual one. If you got the shot not in a clinical trial, you will not be studied, Sylvia. So everybody who just gets the shot, you just got the shot. If you report side effects, those get tracked and those get reported. But if nothing happens, you'll be reported as one of the 80% or so that have no side effects. Yes, but yeah, once you get more and more vaccines out there, or once you get more and more people protected, then trials become harder and harder to run. And I think there will be some ethical questions about running trials when there are vaccines out there. So I think the window will close on running trials at some point. Maybe it'll take a year, maybe a year and a half. And that's what happened with Ebola, by the way. It's what happens in some other areas where once the disease is under control, then it doesn't make sense to continue. And that's one of the reasons why you have certain pharma companies that get more involved or less involved in these areas, because you can put in a lot of money to something and then find out somebody beat you to it and all your money is gone because you just can't even get the patients into the trials. Do I think that this was a Wuhan lab, released virus? There's no evidence, so I wouldn't want to comment on anything beyond what there's evidence for. I know there's lots of rumors and stuff about that, but we don't know. Yeah. Any other questions? Anything else? We're kind of at the 9:30 time, but I can stay on if there are more questions.
Okay.
So this question about, sorry, somebody just put up another question about, can you still pass on the virus to others even after getting both doses? And the answer is we don't know. So it's possible. We really don't know that yet. And is it sufficient to get only one of the 4 types of vaccine? That's a really good question. I don't think anybody's going to offer you 2. And nobody should offer you 2 different shots from 2 different vaccines either. Some of the vaccines, by the way, do have only 1 shot, so you can wait for those if you prefer not to get both needles. We're actually also looking at oral delivery for the vaccine, so we may have that as an option as well. But I think at the moment I would have to say it is sufficient to get 1 vaccine.
David, I want to say this has been very important for everyone. And you can read all over the place, but it's important to be able to hear it from someone who knows what he's talking about. And look, about 70 people came to hear and have a lot of questions, and it's really significant and helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Pleasure.
And good luck. Get rid of that picture behind you.
Yeah.
It's gone now. We cured it.
Okay.
Thank
you, everyone. Laila Tov.
Health to everyone.
Good health to everyone. Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Easy vaccination.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I love the accents of everyone.
Merci beaucoup.
Adequate.
Who's had the
You
vaccination?
say it in Chinese.
Sully's had the vaccination.
Wuhan.
One.
Oh, I'm joking. Wuhan.
So who's had the vaccination?
I've had the vaccination, or at least the first one.
Yeah.
We've had.
Who's that? Hi, Savda.
Hi, how are you? My arm was a little sore, but that's gone now. So it's all been fantastic.
Miriam, you're looking great.
Thank you very much. Lovely to see you.
J'ai 10 minutes.
Thanks, David.
See you, David.
I like that
Thanks,
picture,
Dave.
by the way.
Thank you, David. Excellent. Very
Stay
interesting.
well,
Hi,
everyone.
Summarize.
Thanks.
Hey guys, Laila Tov to everybody.
And
Laila
Tov,
Tov.
Yaron, and Ira.
Sarah.
That doesn't sound so good.
Why? Oh.
Hi, Lily.
And
Hello, Shu. What did Ari just say?
Laila Tov.
He said
Mazal
Mazal Tov to Yaron and Ira. I said, that doesn't sound so good.
sounds fantastic.
No comment.
Double Mazal Tov to Ira and Michelle.
What?
One.
Nothing.
What did she say?
A double Mazal Tov to Ira and Michelle.
Nachon. Oh,
נכון,
Nachon,
double to them.
Nachon. I've got a daughter who's just got married, Baruch Hashem.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a public thing.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Do we
Leaving.
just hang up?
Yes, just push leave.
Leave.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Bye.